Good afternoon and welcome. We're here. This is Now I See a Person Institute, which is a nonprofit helping those who feel hopeless heal. We are supported by donations, and we're going to be talking with you today. We've got Dr. Susan Swam and David Abramovich and Ashley and myself, Megan.
Thank you so much. So we were thinking about that this would be a good time to talk about families that have adult children living in the home. And I was wondering, David, if you wanted to describe that theme for us.
Yeah, I mean, what we've been seeing in our practice and increasingly in the communities that we serve are adult children living with their parents, beyond the age of, you know, 25 because of economic reasons. Here in Los Angeles, price of affordable housing is unaffordable, to say the least, and it's forced families to make decisions about where they live, and many have decided that the best option is to live together, which is beautiful and wonderful. However, it does come with some inherent challenges that we'd like to speak about. And some of those inherent challenges are, you know, um, just different um, generational outlooks on um, certain issues that can be conflictual, and also like the fact that um, people residing in the same home are in different stages in their lives that might create challenges of their own. So yeah, so I think those are the challenges that um, we've been experiencing, and we've been able to transcend those challenges, but it's been a delicate dance, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to interrupt here or move in just for a second. As because I come from both ends, right? So as a parent of an adult child who was living with me during graduate school, and then of course being adult child of my own parents, I don't think that the parent or parents are prepared for this type of um, endeavor. I think at one point in time in our culture, this was absolutely something that was very normal, and I think in some different types of cultures, has been extremely normal for a quite lengthy period of time. But I know for myself, it would have been helpful for me to have talked with other parents that were going through similar endeavors instead of thinking, okay, I'm picking up as a parent when someone moves into your house after they have been living on their own for a period of time. And and how do we negotiate those relationships so that there isn't any kind of inherent conflict? How do we kind of flip that and have some kind of conscious raising types of discussions? So maybe we could start out with the three of you guys, because you aren't my age, talking about like what you would have wanted possibly from your parents as adult children.
Well, I think the main thing is just to kind of be attuned, but in a different way. Is when you're a child, it's sort of like I guess support is the main thing, and sort of not to intervene too much, but sort of just give loving support when solicited. I think is important, and understand that like um, things are different today than they were when they were young, and trying to make sense out of this world, and not always to make comparisons, but sort of listen with open heart, kind of in the similar way that we do with our clients, right? Just listen and ask questions and be inquisitive and curious instead of being judgmental.
Well, I think that we even have to, I'm just going to like take this back a little bit, because I think that, I recently heard of somebody that their last child went off to school, and they're going to a really nice university, and they came back for the holidays. And the first thing that I heard out of both of the parents' mouth was they didn't spend any time with us. They didn't ask us. They did this, they did that. And it was almost if the parents were wanting that same relationship, or that they were comfortable with that same relationship that they had with their children growing up, and not quite seeing that there were distinctions now, that it was an adult living in your house, an adult that usually is living in your house not by choice, but due to economics, because most people do not want to, I don't think, live with their parents if they have a choice. And so if this is due to kind of the financial times that we're living in, and I think it has been that way, especially in California for a long period of time, that adult children have been living with their parents. But it's kind of like an unnatural situation, because parents still see their children as children, and that they have a role to be a parent instead of a roommate. And so I think there's lots of room for conversations like you were talking about, David, that might not reflect the age, or the for lack of a better word, the personhood of that adult child. And I think for a lot of parents, what we do with those parents is kind of help them recognize that things aren't the same, and that they have to somehow come to, whether it's agreements or come to ways of living with each other that's drastically different than when the children left the house, and it's drastically different to when you were raising the children, because you're living with children that you love, children that you birthed, and you don't have that investment in guiding them that you did when they were young. And so a lot of times I think that adult children hear unsolicited comments, like when you were talking about being gentle and talking and things like that, that you hear things from them that you don't ask for. Like you don't, a lot of times when you're living together, it's almost like a roommate situation, although you love these people probably more than anybody else in the world, but you don't need them in the same ways that you needed them when you were young. And I think within that, when parents still try to parent adult children, that not only is it not successful, but it can often lead to violence, as we've heard in some of our clients, and where people kind of get labeled as having maybe a severe psychiatric diagnosis because of everyone living together. So I'm going to stop there and then maybe let you guys maybe reflect a little bit on that.
So, speaking from the perspective of being 23 and, having lived on my own and also living with family and living with friends, um, there is definitely a power dynamic that is going on when, like, it's really shattering to the ego, to go from being super independent to then having to rely on someone, right? So as an adult child, we almost feel like, I don't know, like we don't have our life together, or that there's something inherently wrong, for us to be doing something as normal as living with our family. Because in other cultures, this is something that is super common and normal, and people live with their family until they die or get married. But in American culture, it's not seen that way. We're very much so pushed towards our independence. So when we're put in a financial spot where we can't necessarily afford rent on our own, or there's other common life circumstances that are happening that cause us to, not be able to be self-sufficient. It's really difficult on the ego, and um often little when the ego is really damaged like that, little things that the parents are maybe saying to help and assist can feel really crushing, because we're already put in this situation where we're having to be reliant on them, and we want to be seen as adults and not as the children that need support. But everybody needs support and everybody needs care, and that's normal, especially because we're in a huge economic crash right now. A lot of people got laid off, in the film industry and every industry all around. We had a global pandemic where a majority of us lost our jobs. So of course we're gonna need our community to thrive and survive.
Yeah.
And
And
jumping, sorry.
I was going to jump in just for a second, because one of the things this reminded me of is I had an Aunt Lucille, and my Aunt Lucille went to go live with my grandmother when my grandmother was older. And probably my Aunt Lucille was like, I don't know, maybe 50, maybe 60. I'm not quite sure. I think it was about the time that maybe she retired. Um, she was like a nutritionist at Ohio State University. And I remember, although I did not live with these people, and I loved my aunt and I loved my grandmother, but I would hear these horrible stories of things like the police being called. And like this was like, I don't know, like my goodness, maybe in the 80s, right? So quite a long time ago. And that again, these challenges, were kind of seen that whenever you move home, you adopt this child role again. So regardless if you lived abroad, or regardless if you had like uh, a degree or were finishing up your degree, those dynamics didn't change. And so what I hear from both of you guys saying is that it was kind of crushing. Is that right?
Well, I think it could be crushing and it could be really beautiful as well. It just depends, right? Like, I think there needs to be patience on both ends.
Right. But just kind of talking about a little bit of the perception, not so much solutions at this point in time, but just the perceptions. Like, how is it when, because I'm kind of, you know, I'm a little bit far away from this than you guys are, but how is it when you have unsolicited um, questions or advice?
I
Because
mean,
you just go ahead. Uh-huh.
oh, sorry. Like going back to what you were saying, like it can be really crushing and it can be really intense because, you know, this time and generation is so different than that of my parents or even my grandparents. And, you know, to be, it's very crushing because, you know, at the age of like 20 to 30, it was so much easier for people to get housing like 50 years ago than it is nowadays. And so it's almost like there's this pressure of, oh, there's something wrong with you because you're not able to maintain having 3 or 4 jobs, or, you know, live in a house with um a bunch of like strangers, or even it's just a difficult situation in California and around the world in general. So yeah, it's very diminishing to the ego and the self-confidence to be able to live with family that is putting this pressure that they should be doing something that's almost impossible. And to bridge that gap, I would think, like, I've found so much support from understanding, and like my family that I live with now is very compassionate, very understanding, and like is constantly reminding me, like, okay, like you are strong and you are independent and you are powerful. And just because it's really hard to find housing in California or to find a place to stay doesn't mean that you should just get up and run to elsewhere and like completely lose your marbles over having to figure out how to, you know, manage either multiple jobs or multiple like just trying to live shouldn't be so hard as it is right now. And we should normalize, you know, having to rely on our families and our community and our support system, as opposed to being so individualistic and, you know, feeling in I know that I've personally been trying to shift to feeling more empowered while still accepting support and love from my family and friends.
Yeah, yeah. And so Megan, like you're also kind of this age range, not the same age, but of a similar age range. What reflections do you have on like how accidentally because I accidentally did not do the right things. I can tell you right now. Like I have so much insight than I did when I first had a situation where I had an adult child move back into the home. Like, you know, we're going against so many mores that we're still the parent and we still should have these rights and things like that. I mean, do you have any comments?
I'm kind of thinking, like, I guess I'm kind of thinking, you know, like when there's like that transition from being a kid and kind of seeing your parents in a certain light, and then getting to that age where you realize that like they're human beings too, and they're people, and you know, like they're not perfect and you're not perfect. And I kind of think too with like it's similar here in Vancouver, there's a housing crisis, and you know, there's a lot of for folks that don't have communities or families, there's a lot of reliance on systems, and systems you know, are overwhelmed, right? Like there's not enough beds for kind of people that need them. And so I don't know, I just kind of think like from, I'm not a parent myself, but from my parents like perspective, I don't imagine when they had kids that they would could have predicted that this would be kind of like the climate or environment that we live in. And I don't know, I'm also kind of thinking about generationally, like my parents' parents are at the stage where they're aging, and we're quite blessed that they're able to age at home. And the reason that they can stay at home rather than being in like a care facility is because they have younger generations of family living with them. And so, yeah, I have a grandpa who's in his 90s and he's still at home. And our family has been kind of, I guess, pitching in to um, stay with him. And so I don't know, like, I guess kind of speaking to like the both and the beauty side of it as well, like how beautiful is that it is um, an opportunity in a way for families to come together. And of course, there are those inherent challenges and dynamics. And, I imagine like I've moved and lived with a lot of different folks and, family and friends. And, moving in with family at different stages of life, it's like in each stage, you're kind of like relearning or re-meeting, rediscovering who that person is.
Mm.
And also there's those flavors of, maybe pieces of dynamics from the past, right? Depending on what happened in childhood or anything that was kind of unresolved, or even, people go apart and they take breaks and they live their lives and then they come back together. And it's like in those moments in time, we're different. Than who we were in the past, and maybe we reestablish or rework through. Like I still have, I think, conversations with my mom. I had a beautiful conversation with her recently where it was like, looking back on something that happened a long time ago, and we've talked about it different times, but at this point in time, the people that we are today, the place that we got in that conversation is different than where we would have gotten even a year ago. So yeah, I guess relationships evolve, right?
And that is, some of the beauty that I think that David was starting out with. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges first and then the beauty. So I think this is a beautiful jumping off part because because I do think that we can have absolutely wonderful, beautiful relationships with our parents. And it just takes a lot of shifting from, again, thinking that this is your child and that child needs your guidance, or that child needs advice, or because that child is living with you, then they need to do the same chores that they did when they were children. I think it's hard for parents to see their children as people, and it's hard for the adult children to see their parents as people too. So that was really a very, very beautiful example. And so, David, you were also talking about that it can be, because I heard somebody, when I was taking care of my dad, I was talking to somebody and they had the most wonderful advice for me. Um, they said if I was taking care of my dad, each moment that I had with him, I would want it to be my last moment. So the interactions that we have together, I would want those to be moments that I could look back on and cherish.
Yeah,
So,
I believe that's certainly true. And I think what could happen, and I know like at times when I've lived with my parents and so on and so forth, we've sort of gained a new mutual respect for each other, and sort of rewrote old narratives that were stale and moldy, and these new narratives are vibrant and alive. Um, like I feel like certain things that when I was younger that were viewed as sort of like not being tough, being too sensitive, and so on and so forth, um, were rewritten, and the new chapter consisted of emotional strength and loyalty and support. So I feel like I was extremely fortunate to be able to, in a sense, create a new narrative and relationship between my parents and I. And I'll be forever grateful for that experience.
Mhm. Mhm. And so we would want to give people hope then that regardless of if you're adult child living with your parents due to finances, or you're an adult child that finds you taking care of parents, or you know anywhere in between, that there is so much room for the beautiful to occur. And I remember us doing some research last year on someone that had had a fairly challenging history with their parents, and them saying that part of what made life beautiful was the relationship that they now had with their parents as an adult child. And it's very comforting, I think, to know that these things are possible. Not always easy, but very possible. And Ashley, I don't know if maybe you would have like something that you would like to end on, and maybe having, I don't know, maybe each of us could do that a little bit, like a little bit of popcorn advice on what each of us felt would maybe be helpful for the adult child or for the parent.
So I guess my little popcorn of advice would be just doing your best to communicate openly and honestly, because the baseline is you guys care for each other. And when you have open conversations, you can understand more thoroughly where the other person is coming from and bridge those gaps of generation, culture, religion, background that can be bridged through conversation and through care.
So if you were giving advice to an adult child, one kind of sentence on advice for the adult child, one kind of sentence on the advice for the parent of the adult child, what would that be? And then I'm going to ask Megan and David the same.
Um, my main advice would be just to hang in there. This is a lifelong relationship, so keeping things on a good note, but again, being honest, because you don't want to suppress your own emotions, because when either party suppresses their emotions, that's gonna cause an explosion of some kind. So just again, yeah, just trying to communicate, hang in there, and yeah, it's difficult in a lot of ways, and I I I wish I had like a clear cut answer for everyone, but as this is something that I myself am working through, I see that just I'm just doing my best to communicate. I'm doing my best to be present and to understand where they're coming from, but also share my perspective so that they can understand me more.
Mhm.
And maybe they might not understand you, and that's okay, because at least you're trying to be understood.
Mhm.
And you find people that will understand you.
Mhm.
These situations are not permanent. So if it's really that unbearable, someday soon it will be over. But in the future, just live a way that when you look back on it, you can just be grateful for the time that you spent with each other.
Mhm. So again, kind of the patience and the knowing that it's just a wrinkle in time, and wanting kind of that that being true to yourself. So what would you and Megan, what would you and David like have for some final thoughts?
For me, I would just think, I mean, the word that sort of comes to my head is just tolerance and attunement, really, like understanding what stage the parent or the child is in their lives, and try to understand that the world's just a bit different than it was before. And for parents, I think it's maybe not to parent per se, but to listen. And for children, it's not to, sort of like judge their parents, but to appreciate them. Um, I think it's just changing sort of that perspective that we have, and our outlook. And I think that if we do change our outlook and our perspective, I think that uh, it doesn't have to be a painful situation, but it can be a really fulfilling and fruitful and special situation that might only happen once in a lifetime.
And so, Megan, did you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think just kind of like echoing some of what Ashley and David already said. Um, for me, that piece of like nothing's permanent. Um, yeah, life is constant change, and how can we find those like points of connection, um, or cherish the moments that we do have. They're not all going to be beautiful, but I guess even within the hard times, um, looking for, searching for that gratitude, or being able to kind of like see the other person as a person, and trying to find some way to relate, um, like through, I don't know, I love nature, like sharing meals together, cooking, um, yeah, those pieces of coming together, noticing those.
It's funny, I had like this follow-up conversation with those people that were puzzling why their son didn't want to, their adult son didn't want to spend time with them anymore. And it's something that they were able to have patience with and be able to negotiate around. I think that what you guys have talked about is just so very important. And how do we lovingly shift roles that were so solidified for such a long period of time? And I do think that podcasts such as this does bring about awareness for both the parents and the adult children. And so that there's not an Aunt Lucille who's calling the police on your grandmother calling the police on Aunt Lucille, that things are uh, a little bit easier negotiated. So thank you all for the time today and for this subject that is so important to so many of the people that we're seeing at this point in time. And thank you all for spending time with us discussing this
Thank you.
as we continue to explore ideas on finding freedom. Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful day, guys.
Bye bye.